So we will take about 18 minutes of your time with a little fireside chat with our co-chairs, Katie and Jacques, to talk about this topic that is dear to us here, closing the gender gap in the workplace and allowing women to access decision-making bodies. So my first question to both of you is going to be around a topic that I've shared during my speech, and I think everybody got the fact that I was very convinced and passionate about quotas. I wasn't always feeling that way. I always thought, like everyone else, this is going to happen naturally, just let it happen. But the reality is, it's not happening. So I'd love your perspective on that question of quotas. Yes.
On quotas. So as Caroline knows, and some of you in the room I worked with on this, I was an early proponent of our Comply or Explain legislation here in Canada. And I have to say that I was fervently behind the idea that Canadians would jump on board because we do like to do things in the right way. And I was just so confident that this was going to take off and be the thing that changed. And I was not right. Clearly, if you look at the number of companies that still have no women on the board, I was clearly not right. And so I've had...
Optimistic.
I'm very optimistic, but not right. And that's okay. That's okay, because sometimes that happens. But you do have to go back and say to yourself, all right, what was wrong with my set of assumptions that led me to believe that this would be the seismic shift that we were all expecting? And don't get me wrong, there has been progress. The fact that we are gathered this many people in the room tonight, congratulations. Full house. And 31 companies celebrate, like progress is underway for sure. But there's more to do. And I'm not all the way to quotas yet. You and I have had this conversation because I think that there is a next step. I think the next step is that we need to start to treat human capital the same way we treat all other forms of capital in our business, which is we need to measure it. We need to set targets for it. We need to understand where it is. We need to understand how it's deployed. We need to understand what the ROI on our investments in our human capital is. And women should be, and are, in the early stages of the workforce at least, over 50% of that human capital. So let's start measuring those investments. Let's start targeting outcomes the same way we target sales and customer retention and sometimes EPS if you're giving guidance. I mean, companies are very oriented to measuring things. So let's start measuring this. And let's start being very explicit around how many women we have, how many women advance to the next level and the next level. And not just stick with the law of averages, let's also look at what roles are they in. Are they in the roles that can take them to the CEO's job or not? And how many do we have in those roles? And be very deliberate about what outcomes we're trying to achieve. And so that's where my head's at the moment.
If it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done.
I believe that.
I agree with that, by the way. So we know what gets measured gets managed. When we talk about quotas, it's typically in the context of what's happening at the top of the house. And in my view, women's voices have to be heard throughout the entire organization, from the entry level all the way to the top. And I'll go back a little bit to what Minister Morneau said. Companies that don't harness and leverage the talent, the insights, the intelligence, the experience of women are companies that are not operating at their full performance potential. So that's how I look at it in my view, and I think we have to go much beyond what's going on at the top is very important, but it's an issue about the entire organization.
Actually, Jacques, do you want to jump in to share what Sun Life is doing to allow women to progress?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at Sun Life, if you look, our board is about 30% women. The nice thing for us, and so we're not there yet, right? We got some work to do, and we agree with that. If you go down to the organization, when you get to VP levels, for example, and then to middle management, our numbers get a lot better. So in fact, across the entire company, we're at 62% women. So one of the things that means is we have a good pipeline. But as Katie said, it has to be more than that. You have to be looking at your talent management processes. You have to look at, which women need mentorship, sponsorship, and how do we ensure that when they progress through the pipeline, we get the results that we want. So we're doing a lot. It's not there yet, but we think we're making good progress.
Fantastic. Katie, obviously, I'm going to say women in governance is a great tool to advance parity, but I also would love to hear you about the CPP-IB that recently announced the policy to take voting action if the board has no women directors. I know we have people from the CPP Investment Board with us tonight.
Big shout out to Table 10.
So thank you for that. And so could you talk to us about how you see this impacting the numbers?
Sure, and to say that this is is a management initiative. The board, where I sit, is not directly involved in the setting of governance guidelines, but obviously kept informed of what the management team is doing. And I would say personally very supportive, obviously, of this action. And it's really an interesting turn of events, and not just at CPP-IB, but I would say in the investor community generally. Because Maureen will remember, Maureen is out there, shout out hello to the CEO of the OSC, when Comply or Explain was first introduced, and then we had a couple of years later, what's gone right, what's gone wrong. And at that moment in time, we were trying to figure out how to get the proxy advisors engaged in the conversation around the board diversity conversation. And at that moment in time, their response was, and this is just, I would say 2-3 short years ago, it's not an issue on the agenda of our investors. It's just not on our members' list of the things we need to worry about. Fast forward to today, and ISS, Glass Lewis, CPP-IB, other large institutional asset managers around the world have completely come around and said, no, that's not right, because this isn't about social policy. This is about financial success and financial outcomes. And therefore, and we know that all of those things translate, so women on boards do matter. And so now all of a sudden, people say, okay, we're going to vote no for the governance chair if there's no women on the board. So all of a sudden we have this very interesting dynamic where a man is about to lose his board seat if he doesn't find a woman. He'll find a woman.
Jacques, earlier you mentioned sponsoring, mentoring. I'd love to hear what you've done in the past to support women's progress within the organization.
Yeah. So I joined Sun Life a year ago, in 2018. And when I arrived, one of the things I did is make sure that we move the needle, turn the dial up. Over the last year, we've appointed 2 more women on our Canadian executive team. So I'm quite pleased with that. Before I joined Sun Life, I spent 29 years with a global consulting firm. They're sitting over there. I think her name is Mercer. And in that role, the years I was there, I was mentoring women and sponsoring women, a number of women every year. And I have to say that there are moments in your professional career that are moments that you cherish more than others. And about a month ago, and these people there are well aware of this, Mercer named a new CEO at the global level. And it happens to be a woman that I actively mentored. So it was one of these cherishable moments. I was quite proud of that. And in fact, I should add that she's Canadian, by the way. So.
That's right. Kitty, you're a woman who has had a most impressive career path. You have succeeded in highly male-dominated industries. What would you say was the key to your success? Or one of the keys, or some of the keys?
Some of the keys, yeah. There's a long, long list. We could be here longer than 18 minutes. So I will try to be brief. But I do think that part of it, as you all know, I grew up I was a lawyer and an MBA by training, was a securities lawyer for a while, male-dominated industry, went on into the hotel industry as male-dominated as the securities and capital markets industries. So it was an interesting journey. But one of the things that I think helped me along the way was that I didn't really have a lot of preconceived notions about what that meant to be a woman in business. I didn't see the limitations right away that were so obvious to me quite a bit later in life. I wasn't daunted by that fact. 3 brothers. I grew up in a small town, and there were no women in business in the small town I grew up in. So role models were all in different places, and so I was a bit naive, I would say, in the first few iterations of that. But as I grew into it, mentorship, sponsorship, we talk about these things today as must-haves. I was very lucky to have arrived both in my early days as a securities lawyer and then in my time at Four Seasons, working with groups of men who were married to extremely strong and influential women. It didn't mean that they were working women. It just meant that they were really big voices in the houses where those men had to go home every night. I sort of figured out early on that if they chose those women to spend 365 days a year with, they can put up with me for a couple of hours. And it gave me the opportunity to push the boundaries of my influence maybe a little farther than I thought I might otherwise have. And I ended up, as you know, doing business all over the world, obviously in many regions of the world where women in business were not normal. And so I often arrived as a curiosity, I would say, as the chief negotiator for Four Seasons in my early part of my career, and of course later as the CEO. But never once did I ever experience a moment, other than from my own colleagues who often said, she can't go to Cairo and do that. But out of necessity, I had to, because as our CEO at the time said, we don't have anyone else. And so off I went, and that's such an endorsement, huh? But truly, again, back to sponsor and champion, he was my greatest champion. And he knew that no matter what, I would put my mind to it and get the job done, and I did. And it was an extraordinary couple of decades.
Well, swimmers sink. Obviously, you swam.
Indeed.
A question to both of you. We've been talking a lot in the past couple of years, I would say more than ever, of the question of gender equality. There's an impression that we're actually there for certain people, and others, actually there's a survey that was done by PwC that suggested mixed feelings regarding diversity. More than half of the respondents said that board diversity efforts are driven by political correctness, and nearly half think shareholders are too preoccupied with the topic. So what are your thoughts on that?
Let me go first. I would say it's a bit unfortunate, and frankly, I would probably say it's misguided. If you look at the case for women, as I said, we want to hear the voices of women throughout the organization. At the end of the day, it's really about performance, right? And we think that companies that have diverse teams perform better. Performance of companies better means that the economy is thriving, the country is doing better. So in my view, if we get to where we need to be, everybody, it's kind of like the water that rises all the boats, right? So everybody will be better off, and people who feel that, no, this is just a political correctness issue, they'll be better off too. So in my view, that's what we need to go for.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that during my speech, if a chairman says he can't find women to send me an email, I'm sure that it happens to you as well, that you hear that. So what do you do, Katie? Do you have in your pocket a little list of women that you hand out?
I have in my head a list of women, and like so many women, I participate in all kinds of women on board. I do an awful lot of mentoring. I'm always coaching women on next steps in that regard. And just today had lunch with a very terrific young woman who I recommended for a board, and she's accepted. And so that was a great thing for me as well. Having said that, you know, one of the things that I always point to is that the largest companies in Canada, the most complex companies in Canada, CPPIB, the Royal Bank, Air Canada, I'm just picking my own boards, but think about these are very complex businesses, and all of them have had no trouble finding qualified, highly qualified women to serve on their boards. So if Canada's biggest companies have actually had no trouble, then the excuse, as you call it, doesn't really ring true, does it?
So do you think Justin Trudeau should sign these 211 letters to chairmen of boards who don't have women?
You should have seen Morneau's reaction when you said that.
He knew it was coming, I warned him.
You know exactly what I think. And whether it's him or someone else, I mean, the message has to be very clear. I do think that back to my previous point, I do think the attitude of the investor community is going to be very, very important here, and that's something that we can all celebrate.
And Caroline, picking up on a previous point in a way, the population is roughly 50-50. I think you said 51, but you know. And if you look at it, there's a wealth of talent on the men's side and a wealth of talent on the women's side. These are deep, deep talent pools, right? So logic would be that when you're looking for somebody, half of the time, it should be a woman, frankly.
Amen to that.